Yeah, I agree with you. I think throughout my whole career, and even probably before that, I'd say people were looking for an alternative to the dollar. I think about the birth of the SDR, the special drawing rights at the IMF, comes about to help supplement, not supplant, but supplement the dollar. And we have this Triffin paradox that I think people are wrestling with, and
Mm.
that is that as the nation, like the U.S., provides the reserve asset, dollars, treasury bonds, the more the U.S. has to go into debt to do so. And the more debt there is, eventually undermines the credibility of the currency. That's the sort of heart of the issue. And so, and I think also there's another like political aspect here too, where nobody likes to bully in their neighborhood. And the U.S., the dominant, with the dollar being so dominant, of course, nationalistic forces around the world won't necessarily like that. They want to have their currency, like President of Brazil, Lula, had said, like, why should the dollar be it? Like, who picked it? How did we have this happen? And so I think so. So one point I'd say is yes, there seems to be always a search for an alternative. Secondly, I'd say that throughout my career, it's turned out to be like pretenders. Uh, Early on in my career, say the second half of the 80s, Japanese yen. People thought Japan was the world's largest creditor nation, the largest exporter, that the world was going to be dominated by the Japanese. And of course, that didn't happen. And then the birth of the euro gave us an economic area, an economy that could rival the US. And I remember people saying, now that there's an alternative, it's going to be the euro. And a few years down the road, when that became obviously not going to be the case, I remember reading a money center bank's research suggesting that it's going to be crypto. That was going to be the future, and this was for institutional, not just for the retail community, but for institutional investors. They should be buying crypto and putting it in their reserves, treasury reserves or nation state reserves. And so now I think, of course, that to your point, that the RMB has captured people's imaginations, size of the economy, but also since 9/11, the U.S. has been increasingly using sanctions. First, after going after terrorist financing, but it's obviously maybe since Russia invaded Ukraine, it's become much bigger and perhaps even to the point where even some of the U.S. allies might be afraid if they would be cited or sanctioned. And so I think about like Singapore, which is at the same time it's buying U.S. fighter jets for defense. It's also buying more gold and storing the gold, not in the US, not at the Federal Reserve at Fort Knox, but they're storing it in Singapore. In case they get sanctioned, they could draw on it in a way that, of course, Russia cannot draw on its gold that it had in the US or Europe for that
Right.
matter. So I think that the sanction regime is also encouraging people to look for alternatives or alternatives to either to hold their savings or location of that. And then I think there's also this other thing that's happened that's sort of, well, I kind of like that concept of being overdetermined, that there's many factors that are driving this rather than just one cause. And one thing that has also happened, of course, is technology, the advancement in technological payment systems. So you think about what happens. I can go on to say a website, a retail website, and I could use their credit card. I could use my own personal credit card. I could use their credit, their store credit that you earn, or I could use PayPal. Well, perhaps there'll be additional different payment systems that we could use, and that's what countries have developed. So Brazil has a payment system. China does. The Fed just starting this month in July, the Fed's it's called Fed Now, which allows instantaneous payment settlements between banks in the U.S. for the first time. So this technological advancement has sort of lowered the barriers to payment systems that allow other currencies to join that system. So when Australia sells iron ore to China, do they really need to do it in dollars? They do it in RMB or Australian dollars. And I think that's what we're going to find is that uh, is economist types, right? We think about different functions of money, and one of them is a store of value, the other is a transactional vehicle, and the other is a unit of account. Let's leave aside the unit of account. That's just how we price things. So the real issue here, I think, is as a store of value and a transactional vehicle. And what I suspect is going to happen is a dollar's role as a transactional vehicle that could lighten up, that could be reduced. But it's as a store of value that I think it's going to remain very strong. And I think that as a store of value, I'm thinking about central banks' reserves. I'm thinking about the smell test I sometimes used to do when I was younger, going to a foreign country and getting a taxi from the airport to the hotel, and telling the taxi driver that I didn't have any of the local currency yet on me, would they take dollars? And I never was turned down for a taxi driver taking US dollars from me. I have tried other currencies, and they told me no, that they know where an ATM is. So I think that as a store of value, as a sort of a universal language, I don't want to be like ethnocentric and say English is the universal language, because I know it's not, but I do find that more people speak English around the world than might speak some dialect, Hindu dialect, or.
Oh, sure.
And so
It's a
I think
network
that
effect.
dollars
Yeah.
can sort of be like that too, the broad networking effect. And so, but besides, there's a lot of other structural issues we could talk about. But on a big picture point of view, I think that we could see the dollar lose some of its transactional use,
Yeah.
but still be a source of value.